My world imploded not with a bang, but with the quiet slide of divorce papers across a mahogany table on Christmas Day, followed by the chilling sound of my in-laws clapping. Yes, clapping. You think you know betrayal? Buckle up. The rich scent of roasted turkey still hung heavy in the air, a cruel mockery of the festive spirit, as I sat paralyzed at that gleaming Christmas dinner table. My wife, Eleanor, had just pushed those papers toward me, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. And then it happened. Her mom, Patricia, actually said, finally, with this huge, triumphant smile, while her dad, Richard, patted Eleanor on the shoulder like she'd just won Employee of the Month. It was surreal, a scene ripped straight from some twisted reality show where I was the main act in my own public humiliation. Eleanor's grin, that cold, knowing curve of her mouth, told me everything. This wasn't spontaneous. This was a meticulously planned ambush, designed to gut me in front of everyone who supposedly mattered to her. But I had my own surprise. With a quiet calm that belied the storm raging inside me, I slid a small, carefully wrapped box across the table. "Open this," I told her, my voice surprisingly steady, "before you get too excited about your little performance." She rolled her eyes, still so arrogant, so confident in her victory. With dramatic flourishes, as if she were doing me a favor, she tore off the wrapping. The instant she saw what was inside, her face drained of all color. That smug satisfaction vanished, replaced by absolute, gut-wrenching horror. Her hands began to tremble. And just like that, the clapping stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. But to truly understand that moment, we need to rewind, all the way back to 8 months earlier, when the first subtle cracks began to appear in our seemingly perfect life. We'd been married for 7 years, together for 9, and I honestly believed we were unshakable. I first met Eleanor at a god-awful college party. Everyone else was doing keg stands, and there she was, tucked in a corner, actually reading a book. I was instantly captivated. She was getting her MBA, driven and brilliant, while I was pouring my life into building my construction consulting business from nothing. 18-hour days, sleeping in my truck between job sites, that was my reality. Her family, especially Richard, never approved. I didn't come from money, I worked with my hands. They saw me as beneath her. But Eleanor always defended me back then. She'd tell them I was ambitious, hardworking, destined for success. Richard, who owned some fancy finance company, treated me like I was the hired help every time I visited. But I swallowed it for her. I loved her and I believed she had my back. The first 6 years were genuinely good. My business took off around year 3. We bought a beautiful apartment in a great neighborhood, took vacations to places even her parents had to admit were impressive. We were building a life, a real future together. Then, about 8 months before that Christmas dinner, little things started to shift. A cold knot formed in my stomach, a persistent unease I couldn't quite pinpoint. First, her phone, which had always been open, suddenly had a 6-digit password. When I asked, her eyes flashed with an unfamiliar anger. She lashed out, calling me paranoid, controlling. She deserved privacy, she said. Married people didn't have to share everything. I backed off. I didn't want to be that husband, the suspicious jailer. But it bothered me more than I let on. Then came the girls' nights. From once or twice a month, they became every single weekend, Friday and Saturday. Sometimes she wouldn't come home until 3 or 4 a.m. She'd claim she stayed at her friend Chloe's place because she'd had too much to drink, which sounded responsible enough. But when she finally returned, there was no smell of alcohol or smoky bars in her hair. Only the faint, luxurious scent of expensive hotel soap and shampoo. Definitely not Chloe's budget brand. When I cautiously pointed it out, she'd explode, accusing me of inventing problems. Then she'd flip the script. "You trust me, don't you?" delivered in a tone that made me feel like the worst husband alive for daring to question her. The financial red flags started popping up on our joint credit card. Hotels downtown, nice ones, $200 a night minimum. Fancy restaurants I'd always wanted to take her to, but she dismissed as too pricey. Expensive wine bars. Room service at 11 p.m. When I confronted her, she had explanations ready, almost too ready, as if she'd rehearsed them. Work conferences she'd forgotten to mention. Client dinners her company would reimburse. Chloe supposedly loved that particular wine bar. Each explanation, on its own, seemed plausible. But together, they formed a towering, impenetrable wall of lies. Our home life became a battlefield. Conversations turned into arguments or, worse, strained silence. Intimacy vanished completely. When I tried to talk about it, she'd blame work stress, her social life, my constant suspicion. Everything was my fault. I was gaslighted so relentlessly that I began to doubt my own sanity. Was I really just paranoid? Then, one day, it clicked. Something so obvious, so cliché, yet so horrifying. Isabel's husband, Brandon, suddenly started avoiding me at family gatherings. Brandon, who worked in corporate real estate, had always been friendly, asking about my business. Unlike the rest of her family, he actually treated me like a human. But now he couldn't look me in the eye. When he did, a raw, guilty expression sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I connected the dots. Eleanor's strange behavior started around the time Brandon and Isabel moved back to town from Boston. The thought that formed was too awful to contemplate, like something from a bad TV movie. But I couldn't unsee it. Every little detail suddenly made grotesque sense. So, for the first time in 7 years, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my buddy Marcus, who runs a private investigation company. I asked him to follow Eleanor for a weekend, just to see where these mysterious girls' nights actually took her. Marcus owed me a favor from a renovation I'd done for him, so he agreed, no questions asked. That first weekend changed everything. Sunday morning, Marcus sent me photos. They felt like a physical blow, a punch straight through my chest, ripping my heart out. Eleanor's car at a Marriott downtown Friday night, not leaving until Saturday afternoon. Brandon's car, 3 spots away. Photos of them entering the hotel, hand in hand, laughing like newlyweds. Photos of them leaving the next morning, Eleanor in the same clothes, Brandon's arm possessively around her waist. More photos from Saturday night, at an expensive Italian restaurant I'd always wanted to take her to, but she'd claimed was too pricey. Then, back to the same hotel for round 2. I sat in my truck in the Home Depot parking lot for an hour, staring at those pictures. My entire life, revealed as a meticulous lie. This wasn't a mistake, a drunken hookup. This was systematic. Planned. Ongoing. My wife of 7 years, having a full-blown affair with her own sister's husband, a betrayal that shattered not just me, but her entire family. Their comfortable body language, the easy intimacy in those photos, screamed that this had been going on for months. I told Marcus to keep digging. I needed to know how deep this went. Over the next month, the evidence piled up like a prosecutor's dream. Every single weekend, the same pattern, the same hotels, the same routine. But then, Marcus found something even more damning. While looking into Brandon's finances, he discovered Brandon had been using his corporate credit card to pay for many of these hotels and dinners. Embezzlement. To fund an affair. $12,000 over 8 months, all documented, traceable, illegal. This idiot had built a paper trail of his own crimes while simultaneously destroying 2 marriages. The final, sickening piece of the puzzle fell into place when Marcus managed to access Eleanor's Gmail. Those emails, they were like a script for the worst movie ever made. Full of intimate details I never wanted to know, future plans that made me physically ill. They'd been discussing leaving their spouses for months, making detailed plans for their new life together, debating the perfect time to drop the bomb. And then, the email that explained Eleanor's Christmas dinner ambush. They decided the family Christmas gathering was the ideal moment to announce their true love, to present themselves as brave souls who'd found happiness despite the messy circumstances. Eleanor wanted to serve me divorce papers in front of her family, to humiliate me, to make me the bad guy. She wanted her grand moment of triumph, her big dramatic scene, where I was just the discarded loser husband, not good enough for their family. What she didn't know is that I'd spent the last month preparing my own surprise. Working with lawyers, accountants, investigators, I built a case so airtight no one could wriggle out of the consequences. I transferred our apartment into a trust. Moved assets around legally, protecting everything I'd built. I'd created separate folders of evidence for everyone who needed to see it. Isabel, Patricia, Richard, Brandon S. and eventually the police. The week before Christmas, I'd even moved her belongings to a storage unit and scheduled a locksmith to change the locks the morning we were at her parents' house. I was going to let her have her ambush, let her savor her victory for exactly as long as it took her to open my gift. So there I was, watching her face transform from smug victory to absolute terror. She knew, in that split second, that her carefully constructed world was about to explode. The box I gave her held something simple, yet utterly devastating: a USB drive and a small stack of printed photos of her and Brandon at various hotels, with a note: "Open the drive on your laptop. Everyone deserves to see what you've been doing." She tried to shove everything back into the box, her hands shaking uncontrollably, but some of the photos spilled onto the table. Isabel picked one up. It was Brandon and Eleanor kissing outside a Hilton. The sound Isabel made was a choked gasp, a primal scream that froze everyone at the table. Patricia and Richard looked bewildered. Then Richard snatched the USB drive, his voice booming. "What the hell is this?" The same commanding tone he used to fire employees. I stood up slowly. "Before we discuss divorce," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence, "maybe everyone here should know exactly why your daughter wants to end our marriage so badly." Eleanor started, "Don't you dare," but her voice cracked, suddenly sounding desperate and terrified. I calmly explained that for the past 8 months, she'd been having an affair with Brandon, using our joint credit card to fund their hotel weekends, and that Brandon had embezzled from his company to cover additional expenses. Isabel's chair crashed backward as she shot up, screaming at Brandon, demanding if it was true. Calling him every name I'd been thinking, but had been too numb to articulate. Brandon tried to deny it, his face bright red, stammering about how it wasn't what it looked like. Patricia snatched the USB drive. "I want to see proof," she insisted. "This is too insane." I told her to plug it into any computer. Everything was organized, labeled by date and location, complete with hotel receipts, credit card statements, and their sickening email exchanges. My father-in-law, Richard, actually plugged it into his laptop right there. I watched his face crumple as he scrolled through months of documented evidence, his daughter systematically destroying 2 marriages, stealing money to fund her affair. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, over and over, each time quieter, as if the air was being sucked from his lungs. The emails were the worst, not just logistics, but intimate details, future plans. They'd been planning to leave their spouses for months, talking about apartments downtown, European trips, even joking about escaping their boring marriages. One email, in particular, where Eleanor called me a project that never quite worked out, saying she'd only stayed because I was finally making good money and her parents had stopped pressuring her. Reading that when Marcus first showed me felt like being stabbed. Watching her parents read it now, just feet away from her, was pure, cold vindication. Patricia started crying, asking how Eleanor could do this to her sister, to her family. Eleanor sat with her head in her hands, silent. Brandon tried to sneak out, but Isabel blocked the door. "If you walk out," she hissed, "I'll call the police myself and report the embezzlement." A satisfying moment, given that was technically my plan anyway. Richard closed his laptop. He looked at me with something I'd never seen before: respect. "How long have you known?" he asked. I told him about the month of investigation, Marcus, the financial audits. He apologized, truly apologized, for the nightmare his daughter had put me through. But I wasn't done. The divorce papers were only part of Eleanor's plan. I wanted everyone to understand the full scope of her treachery. I pulled my own folder from my jacket. "Over the past month," I explained, "I've been working with lawyers to protect everything I've built." Our apartment was now in a trust she couldn't touch. Our joint accounts had been legally separated, with her signature on documents she'd signed without reading. My business was an LLC, excluding her completely. Every single asset I'd worked for was protected. And the kicker? She'd helped me do it, signing papers I'd told her were routine business documents needing spousal signatures. Her face went even paler. Richard let out a short, bitter laugh. He outplayed you completely, he told his daughter. Then I laid out Brandon S. embezzlement. The $12,000 in corporate funds for personal expenses, all documented. I've already sent this information to Brandon S. boss and the company's legal department, I stated calmly. Criminal charges are likely within the week. Brandon started crying, actual tears, begging me not to destroy his life. You destroyed your own life, I told him, the first time you took my wife to a hotel on your company's dime. Isabel announced right then that she was filing for divorce, taking their daughter to her parents until she found her own place. Patricia immediately said asterisk. That asterisk wouldn't be possible because they weren't supporting this mess. The entire family dynamic, 9 years in the making, shattered in minutes. Everyone turned on each other, blame flying. Eleanor sobbed, trying to claim they'd fallen in love, but Richard cut her off with a coldness I'd never heard from him. You could have helped yourself by getting divorced before you started sleeping with your sister's husband. I grabbed my coat. My lawyer will be in touch with Eleanor regarding the divorce, I said, addressing no one in particular. I'll be filing a countersuit for adultery and financial damages that will make her initial paperwork look like a joke. Eleanor lunged, grabbing my arm, begging me to talk privately, claiming I didn't understand. I pulled away. I understand, I told her, my voice sharp and unwavering, that you wanted to humiliate me today. Instead, you humiliated yourself in front of everyone who matters. And that's something you're going to have to live with forever. Patricia was still crying. Richard was yelling at Brandon. Isabel was on the phone, presumably calling a divorce lawyer. Eleanor stood in the middle of the chaos she'd unleashed, looking small, lost, and utterly broken. I walked out to my truck, sat there for a minute, watching through the window as the family imploded without me. My phone buzzed with texts from Eleanor. Come back. We can fix this. It was a mistake. I blocked her number. I drove home. Or, rather, to my apartment. It wasn't ours anymore. It was legally mine. When she eventually tried to come home later that night, her keys didn't work. All her belongings were waiting for her in a climate-controlled storage unit, paid for through the end of the month. The thing about revenge is it only feels good if you've really thought it through, covered every angle, protected yourself. I'd spent a month preparing for that exact moment, working with 3 different lawyers, ensuring everything was legal, all assets protected, all evidence undeniable. Eleanor had spent 8 months thinking she was so clever, fantasizing about her Christmas triumph. She didn't understand I'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. Now, she was standing in the wreckage of her own life, with no one to blame but herself. The best part? This was just the beginning. The legal proceedings, the criminal charges, the social fallout, all still coming. Every single consequence earned through her own choices. The divorce proceedings started 2 weeks after Christmas. My lawyer filed a countersuit, adultery with documented evidence, financial infidelity, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, apparently a real thing you can sue for. Eleanor's lawyer tried for a standard 50-50 split, but my attorney kept stacking evidence folders on the mediation table until their side simply gave up. The judge took one look at the affair timeline, the financial records, the emails planning their manipulation, and decided equitable distribution wasn't going to apply. 6 months later, in July, the divorce was finalized. I kept the apartment, the car, my business, our joint savings. She walked away with her personal belongings and about $15,000 in credit card debt from those 8 months of affair expenses. Brandon's situation somehow got even worse. Corporate America doesn't mess with embezzlement. His company fired him 3 days after I sent them the evidence, then filed criminal charges. The investigation found he'd stolen closer to $18,000. He tried to pay it back, liquidating retirement accounts, borrowing from family, but they prosecuted anyway, wanting to make an example. He pleaded guilty, got 14 months in county jail, 5 years probation, and full restitution. Isabel divorced him while he was awaiting sentencing, getting primary custody of their daughter and child support that would start the moment he got out, assuming he could find a job with a felony conviction. Eleanor's life fell apart in stages that were almost poetic to watch from a distance. First, her job at the marketing firm. Not officially fired, but the scandal made her radioactive. Clients requested different account managers. She was encouraged to resign. Then, her friend group evaporated. Apparently, no one wants to stay friends with someone who had an affair with her own brother-in-law and blew up 2 families. Her social media, once a constant stream of brunches and girls' trips, went silent. Every photo from the past year was now just evidence of lies. She moved back into her childhood bedroom at Patricia and Richard's, unable to afford rent. Her parents made it clear it was temporary. The financial destruction was the most satisfying part for me. Money was how her family measured success. She'd looked down on my working-class background for years while enjoying the lifestyle my business provided. Now she was broke, in a way her family found utterly shameful. Her parents had to take out a loan for her divorce attorney because she'd burned through her savings on the affair. They made her pay them back by working data entry at Richard's company for $13 an hour, the only job he could give her without his other employees quitting. Isabel wouldn't speak to her, blocked her everywhere, wouldn't let her see her niece, and told everyone at her mom's book club exactly what happened. Everyone knew. My business, surprisingly, grew. People love supporting a small business owner publicly betrayed who handled it with class. The story spread through my network, always framed as, this guy's wife cheated on him with her sister's husband, and he completely outmaneuvered her legally. I got referrals, networking invites, even featured in a local business magazine article about overcoming adversity. Everything she tried to take from me ended up making me stronger. Everything she tried to build for herself crumbled. About 4 months after the divorce, in November, I ran into her at Home Depot. She looked terrible, not just without makeup, but utterly defeated, exhausted. She tried to approach me in the parking lot. I cut her off. We have nothing to discuss. Our lawyers can communicate if there are any legal issues. She started crying right there, between the cars, saying she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, that she'd thrown away something real for something that was never going to work. You didn't lose anything, I told her. You deliberately destroyed it because you thought you'd found something better. Now you get to live with that choice forever. She asked if we could talk, get coffee, work toward forgiveness. I forgave you months ago, I said. Holding on to anger only hurts myself. But forgiveness doesn't mean I want you in my life, in any capacity. She insisted she'd changed, learned, was in therapy. I believed her, probably. But I didn't care. Her personal growth journey wasn't my responsibility. I spent 7 years loving someone who turned out to be a character you were playing, I told her, and I'm not interested in meeting whoever you actually are underneath that performance. I got in my truck and drove away, leaving her crying in the parking lot. The last I heard, through mutual acquaintances, was that she'd moved 2 hours away to escape the social fallout. She got a customer service job for an insurance company, making about $40,000 a year, half of what she made before, a quarter of our combined income. She was dating someone new, a guy from a dating app who didn't know her past. And I genuinely hoped it worked out. I didn't want her to suffer forever. I just wanted her to suffer enough to understand what she'd done, to truly feel the consequences of betraying everyone who trusted her. Brandon got out of jail after 11 months on good behavior, moving back in with his parents because Isabel had sold their house. He was working at a warehouse for $15 an hour. His felony conviction had barred him from corporate real estate. His entire paycheck disappeared into child support and restitution. Isabel remarried about 18 months later to a great guy from her gym who treated her daughter like his own. I was genuinely happy for her. She was an innocent victim, just like me. Eleanor's parents never apologized directly, but Richard did send a formal letter 6 months later, admitting he'd misjudged my character and that I'd handled an impossible situation with grace and intelligence he hadn't given me credit for. He didn't ask for forgiveness or a relationship, just acknowledged he was wrong and that his daughter's selfishness had destroyed something valuable. I appreciated that letter. It felt like closing a circle, validation from someone who'd looked down on me for years. This whole experience taught me that revenge doesn't have to be loud or dramatic to be effective. It just has to be thorough, and legal, and perfectly timed. Eleanor wanted her big dramatic moment at Christmas dinner to be the hero of her own story. I let her have it, right up until I turned it into her worst nightmare. She wanted to humiliate me. Instead, she humiliated herself so completely that years later, people still talked about it as a cautionary tale. She wanted to start fresh with Brandon. Instead, she ended up alone, broke, and socially destroyed, while he sat in jail paying for both their mistakes. I moved on. Eventually, I started dating again, met someone who appreciated what I'd built, someone who didn't see my background as a deficit. My business kept growing. My apartment appreciated. My life got better in ways I couldn't have imagined while I was sitting in that Home Depot parking lot, staring at evidence photos, feeling like my world had ended. Sometimes I still think about that Christmas dinner, how perfectly everything went according to my plan, how her face looked when she realized she'd been utterly outmaneuvered. Those thoughts don't make me angry anymore. They just make me grateful that I had the sense to protect myself and the patience to let her destroy herself. She wanted to end our marriage on her terms, but in the end, she ended it on mine. And that made all the difference. What do you think? Was my approach justified, or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life stories.